My name is Robin Whitmore. I'm 29 years old. Until 3 months ago, I thought my life was stable in the quiet, unremarkable way people mistake for permanence. I wasn't chasing chaos. I wasn't restless. I wasn't looking for an exit. I believed I was already standing inside the future I'd chosen. I worked as a project manager at a mid-sized construction firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. Nothing flashy, but steady. The kind of job that pays well enough to build a life you don't have to apologize for. I drove a reliable car. I rented a clean 2-bedroom apartment downtown. I paid my bills on time. I planned. I saved. And I loved a man I believed was building something alongside me. His name was Richard. We'd been together for 2.5 years. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue in the spring. One of those afternoons that stretches longer than planned, where conversations blur into laughter and people linger instead of leaving. Richard was confident in an easy way. Charismatic without being loud. Ambitious in the way men describe dreams more than steps. He talked about launching his own consulting business, about independence, about not wanting to be tied down to a boss forever. I admired that about him. 6 months into dating, his lease ended. Mine hadn't. It just makes sense, he said. Only for a little while, until I'm back on my feet. That little while turned into 2 years. His business never really launched. There were reasons, always reasons. The market was unstable. He needed better software, better equipment, better timing, better connections. I didn't mind helping at first. I covered rent, utilities, groceries, his phone bill, his car insurance, sometimes his credit card when things were tight. He contributed when he could, a few hundred here, a few there. Enough to say he tried, not enough to matter. I told myself this was partnership, that support was love, that patience would pay off. That's what you do when you believe in someone. The dinner happened on a Saturday in late September. Richard's family lived about 40 minutes away in Huntersville. His parents, his older sister Marissa, and her husband Luke. They'd invited us over for what they called a family celebration. Richard's father had just retired after decades at the county clerk's office. I should have noticed the signs that day. Richard barely spoke during the drive. He was glued to his phone, thumbs moving quickly, a faint smile appearing every few seconds. When I asked if everything was okay, he didn't look up. Yeah, fine. But it didn't feel fine. At the house, he walked in ahead of me. Didn't hold the door. Didn't wait. I was left juggling a bottle of wine and a card while the door nearly closed behind him. Small things. But small things accumulate. Dinner was polite, tense in a way no one acknowledged. The table was set beautifully. Cloth napkins. Good dishes. His mother had gone all out. The food was warm and generous, the kind that takes hours to prepare. Conversation floated awkwardly. His mother asked me about work, about my current projects. I answered carefully, politely, doing my best to be present. Richard barely participated. He checked his phone repeatedly until his mother gently asked him to put it away. Halfway through the meal, his father raised a glass. I'm grateful, he said, for family, for being here together. We clinked glasses. I reached for Richard's. He pulled his away. Not dramatically, just enough. Marissa noticed. I saw it in her eyes. Then his mother smiled at us. So, she said lightly, you two, any big plans coming up? It was the kind of question parents ask when they're hoping for engagement news. I opened my mouth to deflect with humor. Richard set his fork down hard. We're not together, he said. The room went silent. I stared at him, my brain lagging behind reality. What? I whispered. He turned toward me with a look I didn't recognize. Cold, detached, almost rehearsed. We broke up weeks ago, he said. She just won't accept it. My heart dropped. I looked around the table, searching for confusion, for laughter, for someone to say this was a joke. No one did. And in that moment, I realized something terrible was unfolding. Something I hadn't prepared for. Something I hadn't seen coming. And it was only just beginning. For a few seconds after Richard spoke, no one moved. No one laughed. No one asked him to repeat himself. No one looked at me with the confusion I felt tearing through my chest. The silence pressed in from every side, thick and suffocating, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock in the kitchen. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and uneven, like I'd just run up a flight of stairs I hadn't prepared for. Richard, I said finally, my voice low, controlled by pure instinct. What are you talking about? He didn't hesitate. That was the part that scared me most. We broke up, he said again, louder this time, turning slightly so his family could see his face better than mine. Weeks ago, I told you it was over. I shook my head slowly, trying to ground myself. No, you didn't. We argued, yes, about money, About your spending. But we didn't break up. We lived together. I drove you here tonight. I expected resistance, anger, maybe even guilt. Instead, he exhaled like I'd proven his point. See? He said, gesturing vaguely toward me. This is exactly what I mean. She rewrites everything. She acts like nothing's changed, even when I've been clear. My stomach dropped. His mother's hand flew to her chest. Oh my God, she murmured. His father leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing, studying me like I was something unfamiliar, something potentially dangerous. Marissa's mouth was slightly open. She looked from Richard to me, her expression torn, uncertain. Luke shifted in his seat, uncomfortable, but silent. No, I said, louder now, my heart pounding. That's not true. Richard, we slept in the same bed 4 nights ago. I made you breakfast last Sunday. Pancakes. You said... That doesn't mean anything, he cut in sharply. That's exactly the problem. You act like gestures equal consent. Like because you do things for me, I owe you a relationship. I felt heat rush to my face. That's not fair, I said. I supported you because we were together, because you told me we were building something. His mother stood halfway out of her chair. Richard, is this true? She asked him, her voice trembling. Did you really try to end things? He nodded without missing a beat. Multiple times, he said. I tried to be gentle. I didn't want to embarrass her, but she wouldn't accept it. She kept showing up, acting like nothing had changed. I stared at him, my vision blurring at the edges. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't miscommunication. This was a performance. I looked around the table again, desperate now, hoping someone would see the cracks, hoping someone would remember the holidays we'd spent together, the birthday gifts, the vacations, the way Richard leaned on me financially, emotionally. But all I saw were faces rearranging their understanding of reality in real time. His father's jaw tightened. Robin, he said slowly, carefully, is this true? The question felt like a verdict already decided. No, I said, my voice shaking despite my efforts. This is insane. We didn't break up. If he wanted to end things, why am I still paying the rent? Why is he still on my insurance? Why are we still sharing? Richard interrupted again, his tone sharpened with something like righteous frustration. Because she wouldn't let me leave, he said. Because every time I tried, she'd cry, or promise things would change, or remind me how much she'd done for me. It felt manipulative. Manipulative. The word landed like a slap. His mother gasped softly. Marissa looked away. Luke stared at his plate. I felt myself shrinking in their eyes, my history compressing into something ugly and unrecognizable. That's not, I began, but Richard didn't let me finish. I didn't want to do this here, he said, shaking his head as if burdened by my behavior. But she forced my hand. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not. I realized then that no amount of truth would sound convincing coming from me. Every sentence I spoke only made me look more desperate, more unstable, more like the person he was describing. My hands were trembling. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. The sound made everyone flinch. I don't know what this is, I said, forcing my voice to steady, but I'm not going to sit here while you lie about me. Richard opened his mouth, maybe to escalate further, maybe to finish destroying me, but I didn't wait. I'm leaving, I said. His mother started to speak. His father shifted forward. Marissa looked like she might say my name. I didn't give any of them the chance. I walked out of the dining room, through the living room where framed family photos lined the walls. Christmas mornings, beach vacations, smiling faces that now felt like witnesses to something grotesque. I stepped outside into the cool night air, my lungs burning as if I'd been holding my breath for hours. My hands shook so badly I struggled to unlock my car. Once inside, I sat there with the engine off, gripping the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. My chest hurt. My ears rang. My phone buzzed. A text from Marissa. What just happened? I didn't reply. I started the car and drove. The 40-minute drive back felt endless. Streetlights blurred into streaks of yellow and white. My mind replayed the dinner on a loop. Every word, every look, every accusation. Had I missed something? Had he said something I ignored? Was there a conversation I'd blocked out? But no matter how hard I searched, the truth stayed the same. We hadn't broken up. When I finally pulled into the parking garage of the apartment we shared, the building looked different. Smaller. Stranger. Like I was returning to a place I no longer belonged. Inside, everything felt contaminated. His jacket hung on the back of the chair. His shoes were by the door. His laptop sat open on the coffee table, like nothing had changed. I sank onto the couch and stared at the wall. Minutes passed, or hours. I wasn't sure. What I did know was this. Something had shifted permanently at that table. And whatever Richard had planned, whatever story he'd decided to tell about me, I was already standing in the wreckage of it. I just didn't know yet how much he'd taken, or how far he was willing to go. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, while the city hummed faintly outside the windows. Every few minutes, my phone lit up on the nightstand. Missed calls, messages, his name. I didn't answer any of them. At some point before dawn, something inside me went quiet. Not calm, not peace. Resolution. By the time the sun crept through the blinds, I wasn't wondering what went wrong anymore. I wasn't replaying the dinner. I wasn't searching for explanations. I was making decisions. I walked through the apartment slowly, deliberately, as if seeing it for the first time. The couch I'd paid for. The dining table I'd bought because Richard said he worked better with space. The television mounted on the wall. The subscriptions tied to my email, my card. In the bathroom, his grooming products crowded the counter. In the closet, his clothes occupied more space than mine. 2.5 years of shared life. And suddenly it all felt like evidence. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen counter with my laptop open, a legal pad beside it. I started writing lists, accounts, services, names, numbers. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to beg for clarity. I wasn't going to chase someone who had just publicly dismantled me. If Richard wanted out badly enough to rewrite reality in front of his family, he could have it. But not on my dime. Monday morning, I made my first call from my office parking lot before work. The landlord. I explained that I needed to break the lease. He wasn't thrilled. There was a penalty, $1,200. I agreed without hesitation. Worth it. On my lunch break, I called the insurance company and removed Richard from my car policy. He'd been listed as an authorized driver for over a year. The agent confirmed the change. The monthly rate dropped immediately. That night, I went to the bank. The joint checking account, opened 6 months earlier, so Richard could contribute more easily, was closed. He'd deposited maybe $300 total. I'd deposited thousands. The teller asked if I was sure. I've never been more sure, I said. I went home and changed the Wi-Fi password. Canceled Netflix. Canceled the Spotify family plan. Canceled the credit card I'd given him for emergencies. When I pulled up the statement, my stomach turned. Restaurants, takeout, online shopping, grooming appointments. Nearly $2,000 in charges, all while he'd been planning to call me obsessive. By Tuesday, I was packing. I boxed up my clothes, my books, my electronics, kitchen equipment I'd paid for, furniture, lamps, even the coffee maker. I took photos as I went, every room, every item, proof. I left him the couch. I'd bought it used. And the bed frame. He'd actually contributed toward that. Everything else came with me. I found a 1-bedroom apartment across town near my office. Smaller, cleaner, mine. I signed the lease Wednesday evening, moved in Thursday. 2 trips with a U-Haul and a coworker who didn't ask questions, just helped load boxes and handed me bottled water. Richard wasn't there for any of it. He texted Tuesday afternoon. "I'm getting my stuff this weekend," I replied once. "Take what's yours. I'm gone." That's when the calls started. Voicemails, messages, accusations. "You can't just leave. This is my place too. You're being dramatic." I answered once more. "Your name isn't on the lease. Never was. I paid the penalty. It's yours if you want to sign a new lease. Otherwise, you need to be out by the end of the month." Then I blocked his number, blocked his social media, blocked his email. Clean break. That night, alone in my new apartment, I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and felt something unexpected. Relief. Not happiness, not yet. But space. Space to breathe without being reframed. Space to exist without someone else controlling the story. I thought that was the end. I thought cutting him off financially and emotionally would close the chapter. I was wrong. The weeks after I moved felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful, just hollow. I threw myself into work because it was the one place where reality still made sense. Deadlines, emails, blueprints, meetings where words meant what they were supposed to mean. I stayed late at the office most nights. Not because I had to, but because going home meant being alone with my thoughts, and I wasn't ready for that yet. I avoided the places Richard and I used to go together. The Italian restaurant downtown where we had our first real date. The coffee shop on Trade Street where he used to network for hours without ever landing a client. I changed my routes, changed my routines. Friends knew something had happened. They could see it in the way I flinched when my phone buzzed, or how I deflected questions with a tight smile. "We split," I said when asked. It didn't work out. Most people didn't push. A few asked if I was okay. I'm fine, I told him. I wasn't sure if that was a lie or just a placeholder until I figured out the truth. At night, fragments of the dinner replayed in my head. Richard's voice, the way his mother looked at me, his father's silence. I started questioning myself, wondering if I'd missed something, if there had been a conversation I misunderstood. Gaslighting does that. It makes you audit your own memory like it's evidence in a trial you didn't know you were on trial for. But every time doubt crept in, I went back to facts. We hadn't broken up. There had been no final conversation. He had still been living off my income when he accused me of obsession. That mattered. 2 weeks passed. The new apartment slowly began to feel like mine. I unpacked deliberately, decorated sparingly, no compromises, no asking for approval, just clean lines and quiet. Then, on a Thursday evening in mid-October, I stopped by the grocery store near my place, the Harris Teeter on East Boulevard. I was standing in the cereal aisle, staring at 2 unfamiliar boxes when I heard my name. Robin? I froze before turning. It was Marissa. Richard's sister stood there with a cart, dressed casually, her hair pulled back, surprise written plainly across her face. "Oh," she said softly. "Hey." I nodded, polite, guarded. "Hi." "How are you?" she asked. "Doing fine," I said. "You?" She hesitated, glancing down the aisle. It was empty. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Outside?" Every instinct told me to say no. Pulling anything from Richard's world back into my life felt like inviting contamination. But curiosity won. Or maybe I just needed confirmation that I hadn't imagined everything. "Okay," I said. We checked out separately and met by her car in the parking lot. She leaned against the driver's door, arms crossed tightly like she was bracing herself. "I need to tell you something," she said. "I'd rather not reopen everything," I replied. "It's done. I've moved on." She shook her head. "No, you haven't heard this part." My stomach tightened. "Richard lied," she said, "about all of it." I felt my pulse spike. "He never broke up with you," she continued, words coming faster now. "The dinner, the accusations, the story about you being obsessive, he made it up, planned it." "Why?" I asked. Marissa swallowed. "Because there's someone else." The air felt heavier. "A woman named Emily," she said. "His ex. They've been seeing each other for about a month, maybe longer." My hands clenched at my sides. "He wanted a clean exit," she continued. "He wanted everyone to believe you were the problem. That way he wouldn't look like the bad guy. He wanted sympathy." "So he humiliated me on purpose," I said. She nodded, eyes shining. "Yes." I let out a short laugh, sharp, humorless. "After you left," Marissa said quietly, "he didn't cry. He was angry. Not explosive, controlled. He kept pacing the living room, saying he never wanted it to come out like that he tried to handle it privately, but you forced his hand by refusing to accept the breakup." She looked at me. "He kept saying he had no choice." I closed my eyes. "I confronted him," she said. "He admitted everything. Said he had to control the narrative because you had money and stability. He didn't want people thinking he used you." "So he flipped it," I said. "Yes." In that moment, something settled inside me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't confused. I had been calculated. And whatever Richard thought he'd escaped that night at the dinner table, he hadn't escaped the truth. Not really. I didn't respond to Marissa right away. I couldn't. I stood there in the parking lot long after she'd finished speaking. The sounds of carts rolling and car doors slamming, drifting around us like background noise from another life. My body felt heavy, like gravity had increased without warning. Finally, I nodded. I think I said thank you. The words came out automatically, disconnected from how I actually felt. Marissa didn't try to hug me. She didn't reach for my arm again. She just gave me a look that said she understood this wasn't something you comfort someone through. Then she got in her car and drove away. I sat in mine for a long time after that. Once I got back to my apartment, I locked the door, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the edge of the bed. The quiet felt different now, less empty, more sharp. Richard hadn't just broken up with me. He'd engineered my humiliation. The dinner wasn't an emotional outburst. It was strategy, a controlled environment, witnesses, a narrative planted where it would take root the fastest, with his family. He'd decided I was going to be the problem before I ever opened my mouth. I replayed the signs with new clarity. The phone that night in the car, the smiles he tried to hide, the way he walked ahead of me into his parents' house like he'd already separated himself from me. The distance hadn't started at the dinner. It had started when he realized he had somewhere else to land. Emily, his ex. The irony didn't escape me. He'd gone back to the one person who already knew his story, his insecurities, his shortcuts, someone he didn't have to pretend with, someone who remembered him before responsibility. And yet, even then, he hadn't let go of my safety net until he was sure his story would hold. What stayed with me the most wasn't the betrayal. It was the entitlement. He assumed I'd be fine, that because I had money, stability, a career, I could absorb the damage quietly, that my dignity was flexible, that I'd swallow the humiliation and disappear. He never considered that cutting him off wasn't revenge. It was self-respect. I didn't confront him after that. Not once. There was nothing to gain. He'd already shown me exactly who he was when he thought he was in control. I wasn't going to give him another stage, another opportunity to perform, deflect, or reframe. Silence was stronger than any accusation. Over the next few weeks, pieces of the truth began to surface without my involvement. A mutual friend mentioned that Richard and Emily were already having problems. He told her he was between places, that he was focusing on himself, that he didn't need much. What he meant was he needed someone else to pay. When Emily realized that support came with expectations, financial, emotional, otherwise, things unraveled quickly. The relationship ended not with a fight, but with refusal. He reached out to mutual friends after that, spinning new versions of the story, saying I'd overreacted, that I'd stolen from him, that I'd abandoned him without warning. Most people didn't buy it. Marissa had quietly corrected the record where it mattered, not loudly, not publicly, just enough. His parents eventually learned pieces of the truth. I don't know how much. I don't know how they handled it. Parents tend to protect the image of their children even when it cracks. I didn't ask. In early November, I got a text from an unfamiliar number. I made a mistake. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a few seconds. Then I deleted it. Blocked the number. As of now, things are better. Not perfect, but solid. The apartment feels like mine in a way the old one never did. I arranged it how I wanted. Clean, intentional, quiet. Work noticed the shift before I did. A promotion came through. More responsibility, a raise. Recognition that felt earned, not conditional. I've gone on a few dates. Nothing serious. One man in particular, steady, grounded, stood out because he paid for his own meal without comment. He didn't flinch when I said I wasn't in a rush. That alone felt refreshing. Richard moved back in with his parents in Huntersville. That's what I heard. I don't know how long he stayed. I don't care. Some chapters don't need revisiting to be closed. I still think about that dinner sometimes. The way the room turned on me. The speed with which truth can be rewritten when someone else controls the narrative. But walking out without defending myself, that was the first time I chose myself without hesitation. Cutting him off financially and emotionally was the second. Some people will burn your life down just to stay warm. I'm just glad I stepped out before the fire reached everything. The strangest part was how little I had to do. I didn't expose Richard. I didn't send screenshots. I didn't correct every lie. I just stopped participating. And without my silence being filled in for him, his story began to collapse under its own weight. At first, it was subtle. Small inconsistencies people noticed only after they'd heard the same version of events told 3 different ways. A date that didn't line up. A detail that shifted. An explanation that sounded practiced instead of lived. Then the questions started. Why had he left the apartment so suddenly if he'd already broken up with me weeks earlier? Why had all the bills been in my name? Why did he suddenly need a place to stay? Richard hated those questions. He wasn't prepared for scrutiny without a villain present to deflect toward. Emily had been his contingency, his soft landing, the proof, to himself as much as to anyone else, that he hadn't miscalculated. But Emily wasn't me. She asked questions. She kept her finances separate. She noticed patterns. When he complained about how I'd abandoned him, she asked why he'd been comfortable living off me in the first place. When he hinted about needing help just for a bit, she asked for specifics. When he suggested moving in, she said no. The relationship unraveled quietly. No dramatic breakup, just refusal after refusal until there was nothing left to negotiate. By the time it ended, Richard was out of options. He moved back in with his parents. Huntersville again. The same house, the same driveway he'd stormed out of years earlier, swearing he'd never return. I heard about it through a mutual acquaintance. The tone wasn't gossiping. It was factual, like reporting the weather. He's not doing great, the friend said carefully. I didn't ask follow-up questions. Marissa and I stayed loosely in touch, a text every few weeks, simple check-ins, no rehashing, no mutual therapy sessions. One afternoon, she told me something that stuck. He keeps saying he never expected you to leave so cleanly, she wrote. He thought you'd argue or try to fix it. I stared at that message for a long time. Of course he did, because if I'd fought, he could have reframed it. If I'd begged, he could have pointed and said, "See?" If I'd chased answers, he could have painted me as emotional, unstable, unwilling to let go. Walking away had denied him all of that. By December, most of the people who mattered knew enough of the truth to stop asking questions. The rest were irrelevant. Richard tried one last time to re-enter the narrative. A mutual friend mentioned he'd been asking about me, wondering how I was doing, saying he hoped there were no hard feelings. I laughed when I heard that. Not bitterly, not angrily. Just incredulous. There were no hard feelings. There was simply no access. That distinction seemed to bother him more than anger ever could. I realized then that revenge would have been noisy, public, temporary. What I'd done was quieter. I'd removed myself as a resource. And for someone like Richard, that was devastating. By the time winter settled in, the story no longer felt sharp. It was still there, etched into memory, but it didn't bleed anymore when I touched it. My life had taken on a different rhythm, quieter, more intentional. Mornings were mine again. I woke up when I wanted, made coffee the way I liked it. No one else's schedule to manage, no one else's moods to anticipate. The apartment held my silence without judgment. I noticed how much mental space I'd been giving away before. Not just money, not just time. Attention. I'd spent years adjusting myself around Richard's uncertainty, his plans that never materialized, his needs that were always urgent but never resolved. I'd mistaken patience for partnership, loyalty for obligation. Now, without him in the frame, the imbalance was obvious. Work continued to surprise me. The promotion came with more responsibility, yes, but also more trust. My boss stopped double-checking my decisions. Meetings shifted. People listened differently. It occurred to me that I'd been leading for a long time. I just hadn't realized how much energy I was burning propping someone else up at the same time. Dating stayed casual. I went out when I felt like it. Declined invitations when I didn't. No explanations required. No guilt attached. One evening, after a second date that ended with an easy laugh and a mutual understanding that neither of us was rushing anything, I walked home alone and felt something I hadn't in months. Contentment. Not excitement, not distraction. Contentment. Richard faded into the background of my life in a way that surprised me. I thought there would be more anger, more lingering resentment. But the truth was simpler. He didn't matter enough anymore. I stopped checking mutual connections. Stopped wondering who knew what. Stopped imagining explanations I'd never give. The version of me who needed to be believed by his family didn't exist anymore. One night, driving home late, a song we used to listen to came on the radio. I waited for the familiar ache. It didn't come. Instead, I thought about the woman I'd been at that dinner table, sitting straight-backed, trying to be reasonable, trying to explain herself to people who had already chosen a side. And I felt something close to compassion. She didn't know yet that walking out without defending herself would be the turning point. That silence would be strength. That leaving cleanly would be the thing he never recovered from. I turned the song off and kept driving. That chapter was finished. Not because I'd erased it, but because it no longer defined me. I don't think closure arrives all at once. It comes quietly, in moments you don't announce to anyone. Like the first time you realize you've gone an entire day without thinking about them, or the moment their name stops triggering a reaction and becomes just a name. By early December, I understood something I hadn't at the beginning. What happened at that dinner wasn't just a breakup gone wrong. It was a test. Richard tested how much humiliation I would absorb to keep the peace. How much reality I'd be willing to bend to protect his image. How much of myself I'd give up if he framed it as misunderstanding instead of betrayal. I failed that test in the best possible way. I walked away. I didn't scream. I didn't plead. I didn't fight for a version of myself someone else had already decided to discard. That choice followed me forward in ways I didn't expect. At work, I stopped over-explaining. In relationships, I stopped compensating. In my own head, I stopped rewriting my instincts to sound more reasonable. I trusted myself again. I heard through a mutual friend that Richard still tells the story sometimes. Not dramatically, just selectively, a softer version now, one where things were mutual, where circumstances were complicated, where no one was really at fault. That's fine. People like him need a story they can live inside. I don't. The truth doesn't need defending when your life reflects it. My apartment feels like home in a way no shared space ever did. My calendar belongs to me. My money does what I tell it to do. My time is spent on people who show up without needing to be carried. Sometimes, late at night, I think back to that dining room.